welcome everybody.
Come sit up front.
Yeah, come sit up front. It's more cozy for us. And it's fine if you sneak out early, really.
Chairs way up here.
So thank you for coming tonight. I want to quickly introduce each of us, or have each of us introduce ourselves.
I'm Elizabeth Billings, one of the artists of Ask the River.
I'm Andrea Wasserman, also one of the artists for Ask the River.
Kathy Uuffur, River Steward.
Andrea Wasserman, I'm called Rich.
And Rich is a member of the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs.
Exactly.
And a cultural liaison for the Abenaki. I'm Evie Lovett. I'm also one of the Ask the River artists. The exhibit is in the other room. And we wanted to begin this evening with an acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are today within the lands and waters that are traditional homelands of the Abenaki, their allies and ancestors. The fact that we are in what is now called Brattleboro, a place with the original name of Untitled, means some voices are left out of the conversation. The Abenaki see themselves as the rivers they dwell upon. In our case, help me. Conneticut, the Conneticut, roughly translated as long river or a unity of water in motion.
So tonight is a conversation primarily with sort of a discussion by Rich and Kathy, but just to give you a little bit of introduction, the project Ask the River is I'll just say Ask the River is a public art project intertwining people in place, empowering us to reconnect with the Conneticut River and the waters that flow through it. A number of tributaries converge in Ask the River. It's branched out into a number of facets, so I'll just give you a little introduction about Ask the River. Ask the River is a kinetic sculpture on the Brattleboro transportation facade composed of vibrant patterns of river that visually connect the town of Brattleboro to the Conneticut River. This sculpture comes out of a previously funded and temporary project funded by the NEA Our Town grant in 2015. When we went to deinstall the project on the facade, the preliminary project on the facade of the transportation center, we were met with an emotionally fueled response and discovered the community did not want it to go away. So the new installation will be a permanent sculpture, somewhat different than the one that's there temporarily, planned for 2021, will bring luminosity and attention to the parking experience and the alleyway. Ask the River engages with a large cross-section of the community in Conneticut workshops and performances. We invite you, the community, to join us to produce 25-foot-long silk banners. They're Conneticut silk banners or sun prints using water, bodies, gathered materials to make visible our connection with the constant yet vulnerable flow of water in our watershed and rivers. Working together, we hope people will experience the physical manifestation of water and the currents of water, currents of the river as well. Please let us know if you'd like to join us or create a group that would be interested in making one of those 25-foot Conneticut banners. And if you can see me at the end, it'd be great. I'd be happy to do that. The banners will be unfurled at 2 public and choreographed performances, one in Brattleboro, part of the first Friday in June, and location is not yet determined, but it'll be somewhere downtown, and also in Montpelier at the One World Festival in July 2020. Upon completion of Ask the River, the banners will be transformed into scarves to be worn by a multitude of makers that have joined to make the river community. And Ask River is this exhibition here with a wave of shimmery discs, 400 paper cyanotypes, and a postcard wall. We hope you'll please take a moment and write a postcard with one of the many prompts or thoughts from this evening before you leave. All the postcards will be posted at the end of the exhibit. So many voices are part of this community engagement. Our partners include Brattleboro Museum and Art Center, for sure, the incredible staff, instrumental in making this incredible exhibit, and in planning a collaborative series of cyanotype workshops with their educational and art-making programs starting next week. So many kids in the public schools will also have an opportunity to engage with us here. Also, the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance, and of course our two speakers here this evening. Kathy Uuffur, the Conneticut River steward from the Conneticut River Conservancy, bringing the essential perspective of river advocacy, connectivity, and science, and Rich Holschuh, a cultural liaison for the Elnu Abenaki, sharing the Abenaki perspective that people and place are one. So we've invited each of them to speak about the river and share their perspective, and then we'll open it for questions and any discussion that may arise from whatever they have to say.
Who goes first? I go first. Kwaididon bak, bak minong guzian vigodan namiolan, ulipayo yo dalik amloquik, ulipayo sokwakik, tali montastagak. Hello, my friends. It's good to see you tonight. Welcome you to this place, all of you together tonight, and to the homelands of the Abenaki people here. The Sokoki country, Sokwakik, and this place in particular, Wantastagak, that we call Brattleboro nowadays. Am I loud enough?
Just barely.
Okay. Barely? Okay. Are there any mics here? You want to stand in front of me? Mics? No mics? Okay. There's a mic. Thank you, Russ. Where to begin? It's a long story. 12, 13,000 years, right? People have been here for that long. There are things in the West River that are older than the pyramids. Pretty cool. The land is very old, of course, as well, and the land is what we come from, and we are part of that. I want to start, I've been accused of talking in circles before, and I take that and I accept that. I embrace that. I think that's a good way to be. I don't think of things in a straight line. In the Abenaki language, which I was sharing with you earlier, Alnombaudwa Wongan, the thing that we use to speak with as the people, the Alnomba, the people. We are all just human beings, all in this together in our own places. And so place is going to figure largely in what I'm talking about tonight. In this language, there is no word for time. There's no word for nature. They just aren't a thing unto themselves. There is a word for time. What is it? Karos kiponda. Karos kiponda means so much sand falling down. And that came to mean the sand in an hourglass, the first exposure of the native people to the concept of needing to keep track of everything. An hourglass, so much sand falling down. Originally, what this referred to was actually the process of change. Time is change. They're the same thing. Just substitute those words. No more time, just change. That's what happens. Creation is continual. Everything is always changing. And so, as one would travel down the river, one's home river or a neighboring river, and you would go past the river banks that were eroding constantly because water moves, water is alive, water is life. The sand would fall down. And the conformation of the bank would change from the last time you saw it. So you recognize that change. So much sand falling down. Kasi kiponda. This is what time is. It's change. So a lot of things have happened here. Cut me off when you want to speak.
Or I'll give you a heads
Or
up
give
when
me,
it's
or
10,
give me a
when
poke.
it's 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
What holds all of this together is being in community, being in relationship, in a place. Place is really important. As an indigenous person, look it up in the dictionary. You're the original people of a place. That's the dictionary definition, right? Really simple. First Nations, we call them sometimes. Original peoples, indigenous peoples. You're the original people of a place. And so what you have here is a duality. You have people and you have place. And you put them together and you have indigeneity. Break them apart, you have caused harm. Witness the situation of the native people on this continent and all continents. That helps you to understand what has happened. Unless and until that is addressed in some manner, that harm will continue. And so that harm is not a point in time. It's not something that happened 200, 300, 400 years ago. It continues. Colonization. It continues. It's a process. It's not an event. So indigenous people recognize the place that they are in as the same thing as themselves, and they refer to themselves by that place name. So the people of this place, Wantastagak, are the Wantastagak. Same thing. Can't separate them. The people of the region called Sokwaki, where we are, this larger region in the mid-Connecticut Valley, are the Sokwakiak. They are that place. We call them the Sokoki nowadays. That's the modern term. People up the river in Coas, by Newberry and Haverhill, those are the Coasek. They are the people of Coas. They are the Coas. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. The Penobscot people, they live on the Penobscot River. They are the Penobscot. That's just the way it works. You're the same thing. To the degree that, where was I going with this? I'm going in a circle, okay? What ties it all together? The water you live on. As an Abenaki person, the water you live on is how you anchor yourself. The phrase is called Nsibu, my river. It's just Nsibu. Everyone has their own Sibu. A Sibu is a river. And that's how you refer to yourself. So the people at Wantastagak, they are not referring to the Connecticut. That's the big river that ties it all together, the long river. I'll explain that a little bit more in a minute. They're referring to the West River. That's their river. It comes in here, and that's where they dwell, where those two rivers come together. We call it the West River nowadays. That is not a translation of Wantastuk, the original name of the West River. That's the English name that was added on top of it. It's a good way to claim things by changing the name. Then you don't recognize it anymore. It's ours now. That happened with the West River. The original name, Wantastuk, you see that sounds like Quinituk. We hear the tuk again. Tuk is a river, but it's only used as a suffix. It's added onto words. It doesn't stand by itself, and it means water in motion. So it could refer to a river. It also refers to the tides. It refers to a wave, an ocean wave. So it's water in motion. It's embodied energy in the water, and that's a tuk. Quinituk, Wantastuk, West River. That's a whole story unto itself. It means the river where things are lost. That's the West River. And so the people who live on the West River, the Wantastuk, are the Wantastagak. Those are the people of this place. They're still the people of this place. They're still here. They've always been here. The descendants might live somewhere else right now, but the people are still here. They're in the ground. You walk on them every day. They are in the process of change. Right now, they're changing into something else. Maybe the garden in your backyard. Maybe into your children. They go out in the yard and they play and they eat dirt. Right? So there's this process of change. The people are still here. They recognize themselves as being this place. I'm going to stop for a minute and turn this over to you. And then I'll circle back.
Yeah,
Just like that.
that's great. So when we initially talked about having this conversation, we were thinking less about being rigid with forcing the form of it and more allowing it to flow and sort of challenging ourselves to exist a little bit the way that a river does and not actually knowing how it's going to unfold or not really knowing who's going to talk first or which tributary may flow into which other tributary in the kind of stream of consciousness of our, movements here. But so as you were talking about time and the falling of the sand, my brain immediately went to the erosion along the river and our perception of time and our control of time and how quickly time moves or how quickly we choose to live in time. So I think time has this flexibility to it, and there is a kind of a natural rate of that sand falling, and then there are imposed things that may change how quickly that sand falls, and in my case, from my perspective, how quickly the river erodes, or the way in which the river erodes. So I've been steeped in that a lot in my growing relationship to the dams and to the consideration of electricity and how poetic it is that electricity, when it flows through transmission lines, actually flows like water. It flows to the places where the door is open. It can't be controlled the same way that you can't really control water. And in the damming of the river and to create that electricity, we've made changes in the time of how the river functions and how the river erodes. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I thought of while you were speaking, Rich, was our frame of reference as people moving through space. I think, years ago I worked on another river in a different part of the country, and at that time, in my, late 20s, I started to reorient my way of moving through space from roads to the river. And now, even though I move in my car on the road, it's almost like my ethereal body is following the river and is aware of where the rivers are, and I'm aware of when I cross over a river and which small tributary connects to which larger stream, and that stream connecting to, in my case, the Conneticut, because I put so much of my kind of mental and emotional energy there. And I realized there's a worldview shift there in terms of how you live in place. And so my mental map is oriented around the rivers in our area more strongly than the roads. The other thing that I was thinking when you sort of started describing the Ask the River was the thing that has been so intriguing and beautiful and fun about working with these guys collectively, is this idea of the weaving of these different aspects of how the artists are working to consider the river and weave in and out of the community and in and out of knowledge in a really fun and like robust way, you know. It's almost hard to describe, right? Like what the work is. You have to put it in, you know, put this piece of it in this box and put this piece of it in this box to describe it. And I see, you know, the way you can see ripples on water, right? I see the kind of repercussions of a project or a conversation here that's, you know, been generated by the ideas and the artist's work, and how that has connected into other conversations and other possibilities for, you know, actual healing or projects that, you know, can be done on our waterways. Yay, thank you.
Are there questions from folks out here?
Yeah, what is the meaning of Wintastic Act and Wintastic?
So, Abenaki is a compounding language. You take little words and you squash them together to make big words, like German, polysynthetic language. So we take the word tuk, water in motion, and we combine that with wantas, which means to become lost. So it's the river where things become lost. Wantastigak is at the place of the river where things become lost. You put a K at the end to turn it into what's called a locative form. So that's where we are. We're at the river where things become lost. What's getting lost here? I don't know if we have time to get into that right now. I'm going to leave you dangling. Okay, couple things. Those who understood that it translated that way, and you will find other translations that are perhaps a little off the mark, depending on what you're reading. But that is how it translates in the language. That is often explained by the observation, the speculation that as folks would travel up the West River, the Wantastuk, because it was one of the main east-west routes to cross the Green Mountains and go to the other side, Lake Champlain, usually, you would follow a river because it's going to take the path of least resistance and get there. You choose the wrong tributary and you get lost, right? I think that's a good story. That could happen on any river. You follow it up and you pick the wrong tributary. They're not all called the river where you get lost. This one is. I think the name, and further, the people who named it the river where things get lost were not getting lost. They knew where they were going. They knew this place, this landscape like the back of their hands. They had to, out of survival. So they weren't getting lost. There was a different reason for that. That's an evolving understanding. These are stories we're trying to recover now. Many of them are hidden. They're not lost, they're hidden. We're the ones that are lost. So we gotta find our way back. At the mouth of the Wantastuk, near where the petroglyphs are situated, 15 feet down in the water right now because of the Vernon Dam. Dam's on the river. What's Andy's joke?
What is it? The fish?
It's a crappy dad joke. What'd the fish say when it hit the wall? Damn. Andy's the director of the Conservancy.
Yeah.
And that's his favorite joke, right?
I know.
I'm sorry. At the mouth of the Wantastuk, near the petroglyphs, it's the reason the petroglyphs are there. In the bottom of the river, at one time, there was a whirlpool. It's no longer visible, perhaps due to the siltation of the river from the impoundment. But we We have recovered, Annette Spaulding, the diver who was looking for the petroglyphs, recovered in the course of her research a single entry in the Brattleboro Historical Society archives in a handwritten journal of an interview with a person who grew up in Brattleboro before the dam was built. He would go swimming in the West River with his buddies, and he refers to a whirlpool in the bottom of the river, where if you would put a little stick of wood, it would disappear into the earth. And they cited 3 different places down the Conneticut where it would come out. So this must have been a game that people did at one time here in Wantastagock. And it's the only reference that has ever been found of that whirlpool. That's why the petroglyphs are there. This is an entrance to another world. And that's a whole big cosmological discussion. At the top of one of the tributaries of the Wantastuk, at the height of land, top of the Green Mountains, other end of the same river, there is a cave, an entrance into the underworld with water coming out of it. I think kind of crazy stuff, but not crazy. It's real. This is real. It's as real as it gets. So this is a river where things get lost. Dream about that tonight.
Yeah. And we lost the river where things get lost when they built the Vernon Dam. And so Rich said impoundment, and I often, as I'm traveling through talking to members of the community, I realize how little people know about how dammed our area is, or how dammed the Conneticut is. You think of the Vernon Dam as away in Vernon, but the impoundment is 22 miles long, and the dam has raised the water level. So the river we see when we sit at the bar at the Whetstone is not the natural river. It doesn't actually resemble what the natural river would look like. It doesn't flow the way a natural river would flow. You might notice if you're at the bar around 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock that it's flat, and at 4:30 it's flowing. And the reason why is because the hydroelectric dam is starting to move the water through the turbines. And the river is dammed all the way up through, almost to Canada. There's 13 dams, and 6, 7 of those are hydroelectric dams. And as you get further upriver into the headwaters, they're much larger than the ones we have down here. But the whole nature of how the river functions is incredibly altered from how it used to be. Even in one of the other erosion things I was thinking, because in the last relicensing they increased the height of the river. So there's all this pretty intensive erosion occurring at certain areas of each impoundment as you go up the river. The impoundment above Vernon Dam.
Can you define impoundment?
Yeah,
for-
sorry. Think of it as like dam, water, and this is a pool, almost like a pond, where the water stops and waits until the hydroelectric company allows it to flow through. So that area where the water is waiting is the impoundment or pool.
Does anybody know how long the Vernon Dam impoundment is? I'm sorry?
I just said it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I'm paying attention.
Yeah.
Well, and the one above it, Bellows Falls, 28 miles. And the one above that at Wilder,
42, I think.
42 miles.
46, yeah.
This is a series of lakes.
And the Connecticut is the most dammed river in the United States, correct?
I don't know.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what America
Yes.
says.
All right.
That's damned with a D-A-M-N. For real.
But one of the things that occurred to me the other day, and it's moving water, it's complex, it's carrying sediment, it's it's slow here and it's moving here and they're meeting at the top of the impoundment and dropping sediment. And then depending on when they're generating electricity, you know, it moves at different rates. So it's like, you know, I watch it like a changing body, really. But one of the things that occurred to me as I was driving down along the river and looking at erosion sites along, you know, these sort of walls almost of blank dirt, was that when they, in the last relicensing in 1979, they raised the river level. And so what that means is that the water is penetrating the soil on the sides in the last 40 years. But prior to that, perhaps not for thousands of years. And so the rate of erosion may partly be because as the river made the land, as the river, you know, set the sediments and the silts in place, they were laid down in a certain way. And we are forcing the water back up into a part of kind of the body that wouldn't naturally be there. And so everything is awry in how it functions.
Yeah, there's a lot of change going on.
Yeah.
Not in the natural flow of things.
I was going to say, this is going to sound totally off topic. First of all, I think it's really great to think about what you're saying, because man's part of nature and it's still flowing. I mean, the nice thing is things are still flowing. Man comes in, it's still flowing. And only because I've been reading about this a lot lately, you think of Palestine and Israel, both groups who think it's their land. And you have the Dead Sea. And it's like, is anything ever going to move there? We're lucky that we can, no matter what we've done, things still have room to erode or to move and stuff. And then you have to, here you're like the, you know, the natives and now, and someday these old people that lived in 2000, whatever, they'll be the natives. And there's some movement here, but there are places where the conflict that's caused by people claiming their nativity. How do you move things like that? I told you it's off topic.
I think they have the best people working on that.
you mean Donald Trump when he said yeah, it's up there.
Do you not claim your nativity is kind of the question if you turn it around the other way,
Yeah.
you know.
Do we have time still?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'm also really curious. Somebody mentioned to me the other day about the idea of a, you know, is it a possibility to regain a wild and free river ever? And our notion of a wild and free river is not anything that we know about. And all the habitation, the fish species that have been squelched by this process, you know, can we even recognize when we see one? Is there one around? I mean, I just thought, speaking to that notion that a wild and free river is not even in our conceptual understanding, perhaps.
Someone said the White River? Yeah. Yeah. I know it's an interesting question. You know, can we retain or reclaim our like wild and free selves? It's almost like if you were to let go of the obstacles you place in it, that's what would emerge. But you know, going back to the sand, you know, it's always going to change. It's always changing. So I think it's a question maybe more of allowing the change to change freely on its own accord, as opposed to, you know, controlling it. Maybe.
Carl.
Yeah, I just came here to be the bearer of bad news. There's a little thing called the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Station that's downriver of you guys, about 10 miles downstream of Vernon Dam. It's a net loss energy plant, and it actually pulls the river into reverse for up to a mile downstream when they're pumping at 15,000 cubic feet per second up to the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage Reservoir. Your river is never going to be, there's never going to be anything natural about your section of the river until somebody stands in front of that plant and says, this thing is a killer, it needs to be shut down. And that is the truth. This plant kills fish by the millions. It runs daily. The grid has run by itself without the help of Northfield Mountain many times, has done in the past, can do right now, could do in the future. If you're, the best you're going to do up here is going to be dependent on what happens at Northfield Mountain and Turner's Falls. And you really need to understand that, because every time Northfield Mountain starts pumping uphill, water from the toe of Vernon Dam starts to get pulled downstream. That's how impactful this thing is, and water right at the dam actually gets, the river actually reverses. And that's the antithesis of a river. So, you know, I'm not really here to spoil the party, but there's a reality check that needs to go on, and that is something that needs to happen. Nothing about this river will be natural up here until you reconnect it with the ocean. A river running backward and eating its own young, forced to eat its own young, that's not a living river, and that's what's below you. So you are not connected in several times a day.
Yeah, and you can feel if you're on that part of the river below the Vernon Dam and Northfield Mountain, there's a quality to the space that is uncomfortable, I'll say, you know, if you're paying attention. And like it's,
How?
well, it's like the intensity of the pump station, the fact that when it's dropping the water back into the river, it actually makes the river reverse and go upstream to the dam, creates weird eddies, you know, causes like sediment to drop in weird places. It's a really bizarre feeling place, at least to me, on the river.
Can I add just one thing to that? And I don't know if you can still do this, but there used to be a trail up at the Northfield Mountain Recreation Center. You could walk up to the reservoir. If you ever go up to that reservoir, it will remind you of Silent Spring like nothing you've ever seen. It's a dead place. It's 4 billion gallons of water that have been killed. Everything that goes through those turbines once up and coming down is considered functionally extirpated. That includes 14 different species of fish, eggs, larvae, everything else. Daily killing goes on annually. It's been going on for 47 years, 48 years.
It actually pushes water up the Ashwellet River into New Hampshire, the biggest tributary.
Can you say that again a little more?
When the water is released in Northfield, it pushes the water up the Ashwellet. It's that far away that it's affected. And it really determines, if you want to know where the water is on the Ashwellet and whether you can get out on that comfortably, you look at the water level in Turner's Falls and see where it is. And that is the result of the release of water from Northfield Mountain. And it's really funny because you don't realize just how significant that is by looking at it. We have just recently closed Vermont Yankee, which was like a 6 megawatt, I think, plant. And the Northfield Mountain project is about twice that. It's out twice the power of Vermont Yankee. And to drive by, to look up at the mountain, to look at the river, you would never know that there's a reservoir 800 feet above you and that it flows like 1,200 feet down and pushes out a huge amount of power. And pushes the turbines are pushed by water that pushes up the river, and it's erodes all over the place. And it's just a really
I gotta
good.
jump in here and say it is not hydroelectricity, it is not renewable. Northfield Mountain is pump storage is the only place, if you look on the ISO New England grid, that has a negative balance on the New England power grid. 1.4, there's a smaller one on the Housatonic River. I figure that Northfield Mountain eats up climate changing, natural gas, and all this stuff, and is actually it's a negative energy and a river killer. So it can put out a fast pulse of electricity, but you have to kill the river daily in order to do that. You want to light up casinos and big buildings in Boston and send the power outside of the watershed. You keep running this thing. It was attached to Vermont Yankee. That's why it was built. When Vermont Yankee went down, there should have been a NGO in place that said, time to kill this thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like crack for the New England ISO, right? Other thoughts?
Yeah, so why operate Northfield Mountain? Because it makes money, right? High-priced electricity.
They open the gates there when the peak demand has the highest spot.
Exactly.
And price.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. There was a question here.
Well, I just
and
back to your art project. Right?
Yes.
Because it's going to be an art project about celebrating the river and incorporating some of the things that we've discussed here that we've lost. Is there a plan for the whole thing?
I mean, I think what we're doing here tonight is part of the project. We're trying to figure it out.
Okay.
And we're discussing it, we're opening the conversation. So I think it is, I mean, when Andy and Elizabeth and I originally, the town of Brattleboro had received an Our Town grant from the NEA to do a public art project. And so we wanted to apply for it, and we spent time just sort of sitting in Brattleboro trying to find out what Brattleboro was saying to us. And what kept coming is that the Conneticut runs the spine of the town, and yet there, other than the whetstone, there are no points of connection. So it was the reason for the town's creation. It was the sort of engine of the town. There was maybe a point in the 19th century where, because it was the engine and dirty and coal-powered, the gasification plant, the town actually actively wanted to turn its back to it. Things have shifted, and I think we want things to shift. So the idea of the project was to see if there was a way through art to reorient the town to the river. And now look what's happened. All of these other connections and questions have been have evolved. So I think we don't have answers. This is an inquiry.
That's why you're asking, yeah. Ask the river. So that's the beginning, that's one side, that's the beginning of a conversation. Why would you ask the river anything? Doesn't talk back. Yes, it does. We're getting some of those things right now. When you have a conversation with somebody, you meet them for the first time, you don't get very far. You talk about the weather, talk about your dog, your kids. The more you talk with the other being, the other entity, whatever it is, the more you find out, what's real, what's really happening here. You talk to the river out there right now, you're probably not going to get a lot of happy noises back because we don't know that river any longer. We're separated from it. This is it's the disease of separation, I call it. We're not connected anymore. We're trying to examine that situation right now. How do we go through that process of establishing connection? How do we go through the process of coming back into relationship with the river? Looking at the model that we have with the indigenous people who see themselves as this place. They are the same thing. You take them out of here, you rip the heart out of them. Where are they now? Where are the Beneki? Some of them are still here. That's cool. Some of them are far away. They remember this place. It's their homelands. It's still their homelands. Their ancestors are here. I talked about this before, right? As the people went up and down the river, it's a spoken language. Not written down. The stories were passed along through orality. How do you remember thousands of years of history? There's ways to do it. It's called mnemonics. You have references and you use those and to evoke those stories. As one traveled up and down the river, each place on the river had a story associated with it. We don't know what those stories are anymore, but they all had names and they all had stories. It's kind of a cool thing to dream about too.
And it makes me think of the fish, right? Someone this summer, well, not this summer, over a number of summers is going to be swimming the length of the river. And when I was paddling at one point last summer, you know, I realized how terrifying that sounded, you know, even as the river steward, right? I'm out of my little boat and I thought, oh my gosh, you know, having your body in this river and swimming it and not knowing how deep it is at a certain point, like it's terrifying. But there's also like all these mysteries of what is living in the river and, you know, the fish that migrate up the river and their connection, you know, they're almost hidden from us, from the townspeople, but they're here every spring and they're traveling and we don't see them, but they're there. And they have the same, you know, that same thousands of years of relationship with that journey, you know.
Not to spoke too much more time, but the power company is not connected to the river. In fact, Northfield Mountain calls the river its lower reservoir. They own it. It's not the people's river anymore. It's the power company's river.
Now, nobody can hear you except the people in front of you. So maybe if you turned around and spoke, then everybody would be able to hear you.
This is, you know, regarding being connected to the river.
Yeah.
I'm on the river a lot. I just love being out there. But it's not the people's river anymore. It's the power company's river. In fact, Northfield Mountain calls that 20-mile section from Vernon to Turners Falls, that is known as the lower reservoir of the power company. It's not the people's river any longer.
Right.
It's owned by the power company.
So that is not technically correct.
Well, I mean, I think it's the power company's river if you relinquish your right to it or relationship to it. And so part of it is that conversation of how we reclaim that relationship. But it's true, and it goes back to what Rich said before about the naming, right? So the lower reservoir, the bypass reach. You know, the bypass reach is actually the part of the river that they took the water out of, you know. And so it's, I think, you know, even in my day-to-day work, which fits much more in a regulatory box than this conversation, you know, it's trying to be aware of the language we use and pointing that out. You know, I am not talking about the bypass reach. I'm talking about the part of the river that you have stolen all the water out of that, you know, fish cannot pass through now. So.
Who technically owns the water?
People.
Interesting.
The water belongs to the public. It gets leased to the power company.
So is this in 2020 relicensing of these 5 hydroelectric dams facilities, you know, it's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that is giving the thumbs up or the thumbs down or whatever. So can you explain to us the sort of process?
Contract? Yeah. I mean, so generally in the eastern half of the United States, waters are owned by the public. It is the public trust. We are to, you know, hold it collectively, legally. The land under the water might be owned by New Hampshire or Vermont. The line is actually further in the river than you think because the legal boundary line is the high-low, one of them, watermark before the dam was in place. So it's actually further in the river than people imagine. But with the relicensing, you could think of the license as kind of a contract that we have made with a company. It's a 40-year contract, which is obscene. It's that long. But the idea being that, you know, you have at least the opportunity to revisit this contract and say, you know, is the way that you're using our public resource in, you know, for the public good? And I think there's a lot of nuances to that conversation. And that's part of, in the relicensing process, you know, that, to me, that's the main thing that I can come back to in trying to engage people and talk to people, is that it is a public contract, and so you do have a right to comment on that, and you should make it clear, you know, what you want for the river, how you would like to see the river exist, or how you might like to have access to the river. And we, you know, in a lot of arenas, I think we let that, our rights slip away to a point where we can't even recognize that we have that right. And I feel like part of my job is trying to remind people that it is in fact our collective river, and we should be able to make those decisions. You know, given the current administration, there's supposed to be an Office of Public Participation at FERC, which is, you know, not funded or staffed. So there's, you know, subtle cuts to the attempt to engage the public, like, at every turn. And so that's also a piece of, like, as we engage in policy work, it's trying to maintain those opportunities to actually allow the public to have a voice and not lose it entirely.
Do you want to mention what's been proposed for town meeting, and I assume other towns besides Brattleboro, to get comment on the FERC and have that public participation that you're talking about?
Sure. So we sent essentially resolution language to all of the river towns that are being affected by this relicensing. Partly to have the conversation at town meeting so that people can start to understand this better. In this case, the resolution is focused on the erosion concerns up and down the river. And we are asking town meeting members in all of the towns to possibly vote on this and then have the town submit those comments to FERC. You know, partly FERC is going to make a decision about this license, right? So they can either make that decision in a vacuum if they don't hear from anyone, or if they hear from people saying, you know, actually we are concerned about the erosion and we are, you know, interested in recreating on the river and we do care about the fish, you know, we may be able to sway them a little bit, hopefully a lot, but you know, that's one of the tools we have. So that's one thing that the Conservancy is trying to do, is figure out, you know, other ways to engage in this conversation and make sure that people are involved. And, you know, Carl with his writing is great at helping to translate what is a really complicated regulatory process to folks to understand. And then the next step is figuring out how to make sure that FERC is hearing from our communities about what they care about.
So I'm actually, my final project for in my college, I'm actually doing it myself, involves creating a booklet about the history of Conneticut River, the way people helped it throughout history, and the ways they can help them now. And I'm also looking for some opportunities if I could help the river myself, like volunteering opportunities. Would you guys be any help with that?
Yeah. So on the back table, there's information about my organization that I work for, and there's a volunteer sign-up sheet, so you can sign up for that, and then we'll reach out to you. And then I live in town, and I'm always glad to have a cup of coffee or rope you in and put you to work.
Wendy?
Well, I really like the idea of reestablishing a connection for all of us with the rivers that are in town. And I really appreciate this project. I think it's great. I think you guys are really lifting our awareness of the rivers that are running through town and all that they have for us. And as you were talking, I was thinking, You know, we know the Connecticut, we know the West River, and then I started thinking about the whetstone. And in terms of, you know, I've lived in the area for 40 years, so, you know, I've spent time, you know, in each of these places. But there's something so wonderful about the whetstone, you know, and I was thinking how it has a voice. And we lived very close by it for a number of years, and I would go down there when my daughter was really small. And it really it sang, you know, and it was sweet, and it was a very human size. You know, you could let your daughter walk in the river and be part of it. So I was thinking of Katrina and the voices of all of these rivers that we have, that we can now, with your helps, really start listening to. And I thought of Katrina and how that was a very loud voice, you know, getting our attention.
You mean Irene?
Irene, I'm sorry.
Katrina too.
Yeah, Katrina too, yeah, that was different.
I don't think
Yeah, when Irene,
During Irene,
yes.
as docile.
Yeah. And, you know, just the fact that, that this is part of our community. You know, each one of these rivers, each one of these streams, and they all kind of, you know, come into Connecticut, eventually to the ocean. You know, but this, in relation to us and being Brattleboro people, you know, these are our perimeters. You know, we've got these two west tributaries coming in, and then we've got the north-south of the Connecticut. And just, again, it's just you helping to bring awareness to all of us. This is part of our community.
I just want to say it's not just us, because there are many friendly faces in this room that I am working with or interfacing with who are paddling or also working. Like if you turn around to the woman right behind you, she's working pretty intensely on the whetstone.
Yes, yes.
So part of, to me, what's so great is weaving and making these connections in our community for however people want to engage and like help and connect and, you know, heal, really.
I thought you were.
It's interesting when you talk about wild and free rivers and you talk about change and not really time. I think I would be really interested if your art project could get into people's heads somehow. And what I mean by that is that I think if you lined up 1,000 people and said, would you really like a wild and free Connecticut River? I would like to think that most people would say, yeah, that'd be great. But when you start talking about the Agency of Natural Resources offering river corridors so that the rivers can meander wherever they want to go, when you talk about, you know, the roads fail and and everything caves into the river, I mean, believe me, I lived through this as a floodplain administrator in Guilford and had a lot of conversations with people about what do you think about a wild and free river? Just giving the river enough room to meander was like we were taking something dramatic away from them. So I think we have to try to get into people's minds. What do they really want from the river? What do they really see the river as? Do they see it as a highway where they just get in their car on a road and just expect it to be there? Or, you know, but if there weren't dams and there weren't things, people would start to complain. You know, so there's this kind of we, they. Everybody wants to swim, but nobody wants to give up this swimming pool. So I think somehow getting into the minds of people to say, what do you really want from the river? If it wasn't there, would you really miss it? And if so, what would you miss? Because people work really hard to unchange the change that a river brings to them by building berms and everything else to protect what they want to do with the river, not let the river go where it wants to be.
You had your hand raised before.
To add on to that, instead of having a vote go through a representative town meeting, why not have a direct public vote instead?
Go for it.
I was just going to add that in terms of our project, I think our original tenet is intertwining people in place and empowering us to recognize the river. And we don't have a stake particularly with exactly where this is going to go or what's going to happen but the conversation keeps evolving. And we hope that we'll bring awareness in our cyanotype making process. We'll have a conversation as we make each cyanotype. So please come and join us, all of you, to doing that. But one of the conversations we had yesterday, we continue to have conversations. It's evolving. We met with a woman from the Nature Conservancy yesterday, Eve Frankel, and she reminded us that the deforestation in Vermont, or the reforestation of a devastated countryside, took a very long time. But when we look around Vermont, there's trees now on most hilltops. And saving our river to some extent, that's possible, where it may be viable, how it may be viable, where the public voice is in this process, could also take a long time. So looking for our project to have an answer is probably completely false, but creating awareness around any one of you to move it forward and understanding, I'm going to put it back to Rich to maybe talk about change, because it is changing. Our river's changing, the water's never stopping, and our project seems to be seeping in all directions also. But we love to pause and make something along the way, I guess.
I would just say, I do appreciate it defining ownership of the river and leasing to power company and so on. But aside from that, I mean, if we want to get back to talking about connecting to the river, does anybody know how it's going to go when the new bridge is put in and where the old bridges are? Will they have access, give people access to the river? That would be a really nice way to connect to the river.
I think the town really has, you want to comment on that?
The new bridge is going to be in the next 3 or 4 years, and then the old bridge will be donated to the 2 towns on either side, and it will be most likely an opportunity to build a pedestrian, public, and bikeway on the old bridge. And whether or not there's access to the river is probably up for consideration.
And what access to the river means? Is it actually touching it? Is it looking at it?
Well,
is it being able to look over it?
My first thought is, can you carry a boat or a canoe or a kayak?
There are plans for boat launch.
Okay. Can you swim there?
And you can nap. I mean,
I know. Well, we have access to it.
If you like going down a bank covered with poison ivy.
It's going to take some investment.
Yeah. So on the island, there had been, formally, I guess years ago, a car top boat launch on, the south side. And so as part of the, a required mitigation because of that public funding was that in Hinsdale, there's a boat access area off Prospect Street where they're going to enhance the boat launch there, which they were required to do to mitigate for essentially the loss of that access on the island.
Oh, they still consider that access now?
Yeah, that's a stretch, right? But they do have to, on the bright side, to a certain extent, they have to mitigate for that, so there'll be an improved boat launch down there. But in the conversations, I think these conversations are going on right now, and there's some committees and subcommittees that are pondering this, and both the Wyndham Regional Commission and then the Southwest Regional Planning Commission on the New Hampshire side have been kind of spearheading these conversations about what to do with those old bridges. And certainly, one of the things I suggested is that we should have car top boat access. The trick is you can't have a car over there, so it's going to be, carrying boat access. Yoke boat access.
Yeah, temporary parking. I mean, I don't want to work details out tonight, but
yeah.
I think there's a compromise there.
Yeah.
There was a question there. And then
I would encourage a takeaway from this to be that
forget it.
It wasn't always this way. It's changed to get to this point, and it can change again. So the FERC process, I don't think many of us have really paid attention to the river as communities or citizens, I grew up in a town, I grew up in Vernon with the hydro dam, and my whole life it just was. And the river as it was just was. So, but all of that was a product of what, the dam went in 1903? It was built, started in 1903?
No, it started in 1903, opened in 1909.
Okay, so this century, and I guess Irene was one of the opportunities, 2011, less than a decade ago, for us to notice the rivers again, because we realized the bridges were important. We realized our neighbors or our communities were at risk in ways we had been able to take for granted that they weren't. And I think what to do is to continue this conversation. This conversation shouldn't be just about the art project and thoughtful contemplation. It should be about consideration and reconnecting our own understanding of possibilities and what we want for the river. And I would refer to Carl's writings online in terms of understanding that not only are they not a given, but Northfield Mountain is an abomination. And there are problems associated with those, though, you know, I put myself in a group who just assumed, you know, it's a given, it's a net win, and that was the depth of my consideration. And I think what we're, hopefully this Ask the River, is a much deeper consideration. So that's, I think your question is great. I actually work with Kathy at the River Conservancy. She's got the whole state and New Hampshire. So in terms of why not go to town meeting, why not go to a broader public engagement, which is I think what I heard your question was, it's a matter of realistic resources, and Kathy needs to sort of approach at the town meeting level. That doesn't mean your idea isn't brilliant. It's just beyond our capacity to take this Ask the River. Is that a fair way to put it? Like,
Hell yeah, man, right?
yeah. The tactical reality is the organization has to approach through town meeting. If conversations like this could spark a more broad, deeper conversation and consideration and comments, all the better.
Yeah.
So that's...
Kathy and Richard, there's one question here, and I think we wanted to ask you if there was something that you wanted to sort of say in conclusion. But you had that. Oh, and then there's another one over here. Oh, and Aaron over there. 2 more questions.
Is it fair to ask how clean is the river?
Cleaner than it was.
Yeah.
In the 60s.
Depends where you look.
How clean is the river?
How clean is the river? Constantly changing. So, you know, since the 60s, the water itself has been cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, mostly because we stopped dumping our shit in it. And we figured out that was not a wise thing to do, but, you know, there was a learning process in that for some of us on the planet, not for all.
We all learn.
So yeah, in that regard, it's kind of fun to talk to much older people because their experience of the river was putrid when they were little, and it's no longer, so it's cleaner in that regard. It's still, you know, the river is the bottom of what everything that flows into it in terms of rain. So, you know, the water quality in general in this area, like for swimming, is good, and I generally tell people, like, it's clean unless it just rained, in which case, you know, stay out for a day or 2. Because when it rains, everything is going in. And so that, you know, E. coli, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, all of those things are going up after a rain, sediment, you know. And then in the water quality testing that's done locally, we sometimes find spots where something would be high, like there might be E. coli that's high when it hasn't rained. And so we try to figure out like what's going on there. And in some cases it might be a leaky, you know, septic, or it might be a broken sewer pipe, or it might be coming off a, you know, a farm. But fortunately in this area there aren't that many of them. So And we have a website, Is It Clean? Where we have tried to kind of collate all of the water quality testing in the whole Connecticut River Basin, specifically around bacteria for swimming, where you can check to see if your local tributary is on it and check the levels. I would love to be able to expand that to have all of like the nitrogen and phosphorus and the other things that get tested for, but we're not there yet, so.
Erin.
Andy, Elizabeth, and Evie, and Kathy, I really appreciate this project for the way that you're holding space for the questions, the question of asking the river, and also the personification of the river. And I'm wondering, I don't know the details of how a river recently got personhood, but I wonder how that might be held as a question about the Connecticut River and our other waterways. What that process would look like, and if that would impact any of the work that you're doing, Kathy. That's good, that's fine. I just wanted to put it out there. Because it's a very different thing when we look at the river as not a resource, but as an entity of itself. So I just wonder how that shifts the conversation and creates greater power, and also really connects to how you're personifying the river through your project. So that's what I really appreciate about your project.
Rich, will you just share that?
The Wanganui River in New Zealand was granted personhood by the courts.
And I'm from Hawaii, so we also personify our natural occurrences and bodies.
I can say that the idea has been floated in the Vermont legislature for an amendment to give rights to everybody beyond nation, beyond humans. I don't think that's going to go very far, but it's been floated. And that would have that effect. Rights for everything, everyone, personhood, exactly.
Yeah, and when Steve was talking, one of the things I was thinking of was that you know, it's, to me, I feel like a lot of the focus of my work is really about love. And like a relationship with a human, you know, you have to find your love and your compassion. You know, like if I go talk to a property owner, like a farmer or something, and we're taking a berm out, and we need to have the conversation about like, well, your land may flood, you know, the basis of that conversation is around the question of the loving relationship with that being that carries the water by your house, and how you resolve that, and how you think about that, and how you live in relationship with that other being, you know, whether it's a human being or a water being, as it were. Yeah. What was your question?
You covered it. I was going to talk about how when I was a kid, we couldn't swim in the river, and now we can, and that's a very positive thing that, you know, that happened. So there's more.
Brattleboro only built a wastewater treatment plant around 1970. Now,
Yeah, I'm north of Brattleboro.
So that's, you know, well within my lifetime.
Yeah.
A person of a certain age. Before then, it was a straight pipe. Just picture that. This town and every other town, straight pipe into the river. It's a little different now. I know we're trying to wrap up here. I can't walk out of here without saying that I agree with what Carl has expressed 100%. This is not a feel-good conversation to me. That river is a sick river. It's almost a dead river. But that's the conversation we need to have. We need to have that conversation. And yes, change is constant. Is it going to move in that great direction for a wild and free river? Probably not. I am a pragmatist. I don't think it's going to end well. We see what's going on around us. It's not going to end well. That does not relieve us of our responsibility to do the right thing. So as change happens, what do you do about that? You make the right choice. you make the best choice that you can to try to move back toward balance. Things are always in balance in a system. They're in balance. They're out of balance now. We need to move back toward that. It's huge. I don't feel good about it, but I am grateful that I'm here because that's my job. It's not a party that you're spoiling. It's not a party. It's not a party. This is real, people. This is real. It's not a party. And it's not about us. It's not about us. You talked about getting into people's minds. I agree. We need to do that. But we also need to get into the mind of everyone else. It's not just about the people. That's the problem. It's not about us. We are the land, and the land is us. There is no nature. There is no time. This is it. This is it. Right here, right now. Choose well. That's my philosophy.
Have a message, you're more than welcome to address it to anybody. We will post your postcards at the end of the exhibit. If you would like to make a cyanotype with any one of our groups or form a group, you can come see me. And if you're in town for the first Friday in June, we will unfurl these banners and try to continue the conversation about water.
With a shout out to Erin, who we're working with to choreograph something just extraordinary that everyone can participate in.
Yeah, you missed our introduction, but we're having two public choreographed performances, and Erin is our choreographer. So.
And I would also really invite everyone into that room and experience that space. Mm-hmm. And maybe while you're in there, ask the river the questions that might come to your mind.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Thank you.